My name is Roz, and I was 7 months pregnant with my first child when everything I thought I knew about family fell apart. I married into the Whitfield family 3 years ago, believing I was gaining a second set of parents, a support system, people who would love my baby before it even arrived. My husband Daniel always said his mother and stepfather were a lot, but harmless. I believed him. I never thought the people I called family would let this happen to me. I never thought the man I loved would just stand there and watch. It was supposed to be a normal Sunday dinner. Pot roast, string beans, the same tablecloth Daniel's mother always used for company. I was reaching for the water pitcher when Richard, Daniel's stepfather, started in on me again, something about how I'd trapped his stepson. How a baby this early in the marriage was convenient. I tried to laugh it off the way I always did. Then I said something back. Just one sentence. That was all it took. He rose from his chair so fast it toppled backward. And before I understood what was happening, his fist collided with my stomach. The pain doubled me over instantly. I heard myself scream, and through the ringing in my ears, I saw Daniel, inches away, close enough to grab his stepfather's arm, standing frozen, saying nothing at all. Looking back, I can trace the cracks all the way to Thanksgiving, 4 months earlier. Richard had snapped at the waiter over a cold appetizer, his voice loud enough that other tables turned to look. And Daniel had just squeezed my hand under the table like that was our signal to pretend nothing happened. I remember thinking, that's just how he is. I didn't want to make waves in my first holiday as part of this family. Then came the comments from Linda, Daniel's mother. Little ones dropped so casually I almost missed them. "You've put on weight fast, haven't you? I hope you're not one of those mothers who lets herself go." Each one landed like a paper cut, small, forgettable on its own, but they added up. I started noticing the pattern in Daniel too. Whenever his mother's tone turned sharp or Richard's temper flared, Daniel would get quiet. He'd change the subject, refill someone's drink, laugh a little too hard at a joke that wasn't funny. He called it keeping the peace. I called it disappearing. I brought it up once, gently, in the car after a dinner where Richard had mocked my job in front of everyone. Daniel just sighed and said, "That's just who they are, Claire. You get used to it." I didn't know yet that getting used to it would cost me more than I'd ever imagined. Once I got pregnant, I thought things might soften. They didn't. If anything, the pregnancy gave them a new target to aim at. Linda started referring to the baby as the accident when she thought I couldn't hear, and sometimes when she knew I could. At my own baby shower, she stood up mid-toast and said, "Well, we didn't plan for this one, but we'll make the best of it," while the room laughed politely, and I sat there with a fixed smile, my hand resting protectively over my belly. Richard had opinions about everything, which pediatrician we should use, why I shouldn't baby the child too much, why natural birth was the only acceptable option. When I tried to explain that these were decisions Daniel and I would make together, he waved me off like I hadn't spoken at all. The worst part was watching Daniel navigate it. I'd catch his eye across the room during one of Linda's comments, silently pleading with him to say something, anything. Sometimes he'd mutter a soft, "Mom, come on," under his breath. More often, he said nothing, his jaw tight, his eyes apologetic, but his mouth sealed shut. "They're just set in their ways," he told me one night, refusing to meet my eyes. "It's not worth the fight." I started to wonder whose side he thought he was even supposed to be on, and whether he'd ever choose me if it truly came down to it. The night of the attack, Daniel's cousin Priya drove me to the ER herself, since Daniel was still standing in his mother's driveway, arguing with Richard about how this looked rather than checking on me. The doctor confirmed the baby's heartbeat was steady, but ordered monitoring for the next 48 hours. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, feeling something shift inside me that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. I wasn't going to let this disappear the way everything else had. The next morning, I started writing everything down. Every date, every comment, every excuse Daniel had made for his family over the past 3 years. I saved the text from Linda, calling my pregnancy the accident. I photographed the bruise blooming dark across my stomach. I asked Priya if she'd be willing to say, in writing, what she witnessed at dinner. That's when Priya told me something I hadn't known. Richard had a history, an incident with his ex-wife years before he married Linda, something involving the police that had been quietly settled and never spoken of again. There had been an altercation with Daniel's uncle at a family barbecue, too. One Daniel had only ever described to me as a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Nobody had ever documented any of it. Nobody had ever made him face it. The family had spent years building a wall of excuses around Richard's temper, brick by brick, and every person who stayed quiet had helped build it. I wasn't going to be another brick. I started requesting the ER records, saving voicemails, and asking Priya who else might finally be willing to speak. I planned the confrontation for the following Sunday, the same dinner table where it had happened, on purpose. I wanted them to feel the weight of that room the way I had. But the night before, my resolve wavered. I lay awake next to Daniel, listening to him breathe, wondering if exposing his family would be the thing that finally broke us. We'd built a life together, an apartment full of half-assembled nursery furniture, a shared laugh about names for the baby. Was I about to blow all of that apart over one terrible night? Then my phone lit up. A text from Linda. I think everyone's overreacting about Sunday. Richard barely touched you. Let's not make this bigger than it was. I read it 3 times, my thumb hovering over the screen, my chest tightening with a familiar, sinking doubt. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I'd imagined how hard that punch had actually landed. Then I looked down at the folder of photos, records, and messages I'd gathered. The bruise didn't lie, even if she wanted it to. I wasn't imagining anything. I was done being told I was. I walked into that dining room on Sunday with a folder under my arm, and I sat down like nothing was different, waiting until everyone had settled with their plates before I spoke. I want to talk about last week, I said, and the table went quiet. Richard scoffed, reaching for his wine glass. Here we go. I opened the folder and slid the first item across the table. The ER, discharge papers, the date circled in red. This is from the night you hit me. Then the photograph of the bruise, blooming purple and yellow across my stomach. Linda's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. And this, I said, pulling out my phone, is from Priya's cousin, who was standing by the window that night. I pressed play. The video was shaky, filmed through the kitchen window from outside, but the audio was unmistakable. Linda's voice, sharp and clear. Hit her again. The room went dead silent. Linda's face drained of color. Context matters. That's not what I meant. You don't get to explain that away, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I turned to Daniel last. I need you to say something, right now, in front of them. His eyes darted between his mother, his stepfather, and me, and for the first time in 3 years, I watched him actually choose. She's right, he said quietly, then louder. She's right, Richard, you hit my wife. Mom, you told him to do it again. I heard it. I've heard everything, for years, and I let it go every single time. He looked at me. Not anymore. 2 days later, I filed a police report, and Priya's cousin gave a formal statement corroborating the recording. Richard was charged with assault, and I was granted a temporary restraining order that kept him away from our apartment, our hospital appointments, and eventually the birth itself. He tried calling Daniel a handful of times, insisting it had all been blown out of proportion, but Daniel didn't answer. Linda's unraveling was quieter, but just as complete. Once the video made its way around the family group chat, something Priya made sure of, the aunts and uncles who used to laugh along with Linda's comments stopped returning her calls. Her sister told her, in front of everyone at Christmas, that she wouldn't be attending a single holiday if Linda didn't get help for whatever made her think that video was defensible. The woman who once ruled every family gathering from the head of the table found herself, for the first time, on the outside of it. I didn't feel triumphant watching it happen. Mostly, I felt something looser in my chest, like a held breath finally released. The wall of excuses everyone had built around Richard's temper for years had finally come down, and this time, it wasn't going back up. In the weeks that followed, Daniel went to therapy for the first time in his life, trying to untangle years of learned silence from what he actually believed. I won't pretend it fixed everything overnight. Some nights he still flinched at conflict, still reached for the old habit of smoothing things over instead of speaking up. But he kept showing up to the sessions, and he kept choosing to stand beside me instead of behind his mother. I made my own decision, separate from whatever he chose. My daughter would never sit at a table where cruelty passed for humor, where silence was mistaken for peace. If Daniel came fully into that decision with me, our family would be stronger for it. If he didn't, I already knew I could stand on my own. I wasn't waiting for permission from him or from anyone to protect the life growing inside me. I still think about that dinner table sometimes, the sound of my own voice cutting through years of silence, the look on Daniel's face when he finally chose. I keep asking myself, if the people who were supposed to protect you stood by and watched, would you have stayed silent too? Would you have kept making excuses for the people who hurt you, the way I did for years? I'd love to know. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place and whether you think Daniel deserved a second chance.